Okay, let's start if we could. Do you go by Walt or Walter?
Either one. My
Okay.
family calls me Kelly because my wife thought that was my first name when she met me.
So she still calls you Kelly?
Yeah, all my family call me Kelly, and my grandkids call me Gimps because my oldest grandson, who's 8, couldn't say Gramps.
Oh, that's cute.
And then that just stuck.
Right. And can you give me just a brief overview of your personal and professional background?
I was an accounting major. I've been a CPA. I went to IU, graduated from IU in 1970. Been married to my wife since December of '69, and we have 3 children.
Okay.
And my oldest son has provided us with 1 grandson, my second grandson, and my daughter, who is our youngest, provided us with 3 grandsons, and so they're the 4 that are always on our webpage. And my second son hasn't yet found his mate or had children. So
Sure. Okay.
And all of my kids went to Southeastern, and
Okay.
and all of them live here.
And you've
now.
lived here for
And
how long?
I've lived here since '76. When we moved here, we were the first subdivision other than what was the old town. It's commonly referred to as the downtown, but there never was a downtown. That was the old town. And so it was, there were cattle grazing at Allisonville on 116th Street. And
Sure. Okay.
so I have a long history, but
Sure.
I know there's a lot of people that have had a lot longer history than me here.
Okay. Well, let's start with what qualifies you to be mayor of Fishers.
Without question, I have the most experience. I was council president for 17 of my 21 years on the council, and that was a period we went and built most of the parks, put a process in place so that development would pay for itself. So that's why we have low tax rates, because we had development pay for a lot of the building that we did, the park impact fees, road impact fees. So I was at the helm for all those years, giving clear and consistent signals to the community and to the developers and businesses. So I have that experience. Coupled with that experience, and that's executive leadership experience where you have to make decisions, because I was fortunate to be the council president when we had 3, when we had 5, and then when we grew to 7. And so we made those as choices, because I just thought that was right to have more people. And did little things that helped symbolize things. Created the flag, and it was created for a reason, and it has a certain symbolism. Started a process almost 30 years ago of having comprehensive annual financial reports. And even though it wins an award, the award isn't what's important. What's important is it gives full and complete disclosure of financial information, and it puts a lot of information in there about what we said we were going to do and what we did. Started a state of the town process, because that was important. It was important that we communicated back to the community. And so even though we were real small at first, it also signaled to the marketplace, here's what we're about, and this is what we're going to do, and here's how we did each year. So we did that each year. Initiated the process with the schools and the chamber, thinking it was important that we all met and that we talked periodically. I think right now we're past the talking. We need to start doing more things as opposed to just talking about them, and I think we need more than resolutions. But nonetheless, this community was built because of the school system. This community is why we had the growth, and that's our economic engine. So it's also important that it educates our children, but that's why people move to Fishers, because of the schools, and because as over time, I made sure we had what I called a blended mix of residential opportunity, so that when our children graduated, they could still live here. Maybe they live in a different subdivision that had different economics to it. And then when I built our next home, when I got a promotion, I was able to still live in Fishers. Two of my children have already moved once, and they moved into Fishers, and they moved once again in Fishers. So it makes it nice when you're all in the same area. I guess the bottom line is that was the community experience. My business was auditing and consulting with governments across the country and across the state. So I've been the past president of the Indiana League of Cities. I've been on the board of directors of the National League of Cities. My whole career since '76 has been focused on government, dedicated to government and serving those needs. AICPA, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants committees, on government committees, related committees. So while I win a lot of awards and I've spoken a lot of years, what it really meant was I was able to bring a business acumen with a government acumen, both of them as leadership. I was a managing partner of my office for 10 years and a managing partner of our entire firms, and it's a large firm, one of the 10 largest of our entire firm, state and local government practice. So I know how to lead and manage people and grow things.
Okay. Sort of related, what qualities do you think you would bring to the office that the other candidates do not have?
I think it's the seasoned judgment. It's knowing when you need to say no, what really is going to be a long-term solution and a short-term solution to the issues that we have. And we're going to a city and we were a town, so it's going to separate what was always a strength for so many years, where we were both the executive and legislative branch. When you're smaller and when everyone is getting along, you can be so efficient and the community benefits from that. When you go to the city form of government, now you start to have the separation of powers where the mayor, and this is a strong mayor state, prepares the budget, gives the direction, enters into the contracts, decides where the community is going from a government standpoint. Doesn't do it without public input, which is another thing. I kept always making sure we had strategic plans that we put in place, and then we'd revalidate them from the community. So I have a managed growth approach, and I know how to do that, and I've demonstrated over those 20 years how we can have the growth that we have. And I think people move to Fishers for a reason. I think the difference is right now is that I don't think anyone realized that I was retiring, because our partnership agreement says you have to retire at a certain age. So that meant when I retired, then I was available to do this. And that's why I announced last July when I knew I was going to retire in December. And I thought, who best complete out what we started so many years ago? Our values haven't changed, and by walking the streets, I can assure you the values haven't changed in this community as to what's important. So I bring that seasoned judgment, that sense of family, that sense of what our history is. That's something that's hard to replicate, and you can't get it in a book. You have to have lived it, and you have to make those tough decisions. And as you make them, you learn from them, but you also, I think I've certainly been fortunate that usually there's been fairly nice reporting of a lot of the things we've done in this community.
Okay. What is the single most important issue for Fishers, as you see it?
Right now is we've got to get back on track with what our allocation of resources are to be. And that's, I know there's never a single most important issue, but that's a very important issue. Also, it's going to be important that as we transition, that the mayor and council forge a working relationship, because you need to have a working relationship, but there's also different roles, and it's going to be hard for existing councilors. I went to the city council debate, and some of the things that were talked about were really things that probably the mayor is going to be doing and offering up. But nonetheless, we need to work together, because Fishers was fortunate that we used to not have all the turmoil we've seen of recent years. And there was a reason for that, is that we were responsive to what the community wanted and what they thought they were buying when they moved to Fishers. So I bring that steadiness back to that. And that's what this is going to need as we're changing the structure and how we communicate. It isn't just putting something on a web page. It's how are we communicating, and are we interacting with the community? Are we the stewards that they wanted to see? I had a neighbor once tell me, he said, the reason I don't run for office is because you're down there and know you're watching out for us. He didn't come to all the different hearings and meetings because he just knew I had a feel for the pulse of what this community wanted. And since I've lived here all these years, and my family's lived here all these years, I haven't lost that feel of the pulse. So we've got to make a transition, which will be difficult. We've got to get back on track with our allocation of resources. We've tied up some new revenue growth for some downtown projects that, quite frankly, I still don't believe, and I believe the community doesn't believe, that we had a need for. So once those resources are allocated, you've got to keep paying those bonds off. And once you give away the ground that I bought years ago for public purposes, it's hard, you can't get it back. So we're going to have to make the best of it, but it's going to take, again, I believe, the seasoned judgment to deal with those. Now, the school issue, is the third issue that is probably very critical, because it's a matter that's going to require a complete community approach. I don't think we're going to be successful in getting the legislature to say, let's take 80% of the people getting more and have them give less to themselves and give more to Hamilton County schools. I hope it happens. That's just hopeful. I think we have to figure out as a community, if that isn't successful, while we'll work on it, what is going to be our plan so that we ensure we maintain the highest quality schools, because that's what drives our community.
Okay. What do you hope to accomplish in the first year? As I understand this process, whoever wins is going to turn right around and have to run again or whatever. So it's going to be kind of a tight first year. What do you hope to accomplish in that first year?
I think the first year it's going to give a clear signal to the community as to what is going to be the role and how is government going to operate as a city. Mm-hmm. And so initially it is to make sure that this community bonds together again. They've never had to go through an election like this, and so people say a lot of things in that process, all well-meaning, all good candidates, but at the end of the day, we all live here, we go to the same churches and go to schools here, so we're going to have to all get back together again. So that's going to, in the first year, we will be in office 3 months before candidates have to declare if they even want to run. So you really won't have a record, if you will, to stand on more than about 3 weeks to 4 weeks before people have to decide if they want somebody else to be a mayor.
Right.
So it's not just this first year yet. That's critical, because that's where a lot of reinforcement to the employees. I put out a post on one of my sites that said, the employees are doing a fine job. My umbrage is not with the employees and the quality of our employees. They work hard every day. They don't need to be mired in any of this political process, because they provide the basic service that needs to be done. What we do need to do is make sure that we're working together, schools, townships, the government, for what is best for this community. Because if you were to ask most residents, and I've been walking the streets and talking to them, they just want their taxes to be low and they want everything to be good like it always has been. And so they sometimes don't get as focused on the difference. Well, that's their responsibility. They just know they live here, and if everything works well, then they're happy. And this is a community of families, always has been. We didn't want to be like another community where they can be however they wish to be. Doesn't mean we think they're bad, just means that's not Fishers. Fishers has always known what its identity and what its community is.
Okay. And that leads me to the next question, which is, why is Fishers a good community? What makes it special? And then on the other end of that, what are its problems?
What makes it special, when we brought in people, I was on one of the committees that studied city and town and sat through some of that, and since I had been the State League president, I know most of these communities, visited with most of the communities throughout the state, had a lot of them as my clients over the years. Everyone that came in said, this is really a great place. We wish we could be like Fishers. And when I first got in office, people who lived here, when asked where they lived, said they lived in a suburb of Indianapolis. But we have changed that to where, over those years, so many years, that got converted to where people wanted to be and were proud to be a part of Fishers. I feel good about that. So Fishers, that's one of its strengths. It has a great reputation. It's always been a community that you had confidence in. Low taxes, that's so important to people. And the marrying up or linkage of our resources and the services the community wants. This community has voted favorably for several referendums when some communities didn't on the schools. There's a reason for that, because this community, if it's something they need, then they come out in droves to support it. If it's something they don't need, I think you're going to find that they're going to come out in droves as well to make that clear statement. Problems. A community that I put in place all those impact fees that at first the real estate industry said it was going to stifle development. Well, it hasn't seemed to stifle development. But when you do that, that builds the infrastructure for the new developments. They don't stay new forever. So now it's 20 and 30 years later from some of those initial efforts. Hopefully there's been constant maintenance. I hear in some of the debates we've been in, so I say, well, we need to maintain. Well, you don't just start maintaining after a set period of time. Sometimes roads last and things will last 30, 40, 50 years. Sometimes they don't. Depends on how they were constructed, depends on how they were maintained, depends on what road drove on it and things like that. So we have to make sure now that we have a plan in place to keep that, maintain all of our assets that we have, and that the future things we spend resources on of capital needs are consistent with our long-range plans that we've done for so many years. If you just change it for a current decision that says, well, I sort of like this now, I know I wasn't here, but this is what I would like, well, there's a whole lot of people that said, wait a minute, we moved here because we liked what we saw, and we saw those plans. So it's going to be a challenge. We have to make sure that we continue to add growth and that we do it in a way that the community finds responsive. We also have to make sure our service delivery marries up, because I can remember early on in trying to, when I first set up it was like a programmatic budget, but it was called something else back then, service efforts and accomplishments, the more technical term. And what was happening is I would go to any of the departments, you could pick snow removal. So the first question the department head would say, well, how many snows are we going to have and how deep they are, and then I could tell you how much money I need to fix it. And so you'd say, well, this is how much money we have, what can you do with that? And then you would link through your budget process with the community to see if that married up with them. And if they wanted more allocated for that, and you still had to maintain a low tax base, then you had to decide, well, what would you not do? That takes seasoned judgment. Those are hard choices. It's easy to spend money and resources that have been accumulated over a period of years. It's hard to make those tough choices when you have to say, well, we got to pick what we want. Fire, how quick do we want response times? We can be at a national average, but that may or may not be what the community was willing to pay for, or we could allocate and still provide police protection and permitting and have parks and have them maintained. So we have to make those tough choices. That's the challenge, and the biggest challenge for this community is we cannot let, as a community, even though it's not our responsibility of the government directly, indirectly as a community, our school system has to be financially sound so that we don't have increasing class sizes, we don't wind up having the quality of our educational process go down. Because if it does go down, then we start seeing a lot of homes going for sale and the value of the properties go down.
Okay. Long range, describe the Fishers of 10 years from now.
I'm glad you asked it that way. Some have talked about, well, in 20 years when our bonds are paid off, then life will be good. Well, in 20 years you have a 20-year-old building. It may not be Class A anymore, commercial, it might be Class B. Depends on, again, how those are maintained. If you are focusing on a lot of different apartments, those characteristics can change as the apartment complex isn't brand new, but it's older. Retail moves around. So the long range, we have to be able to get the growth and focus the growth commercially along 37 and along I-69 and office-wise, if it was this community didn't want manufacturing, has always said that, because we could have made the choice and say we could put some plants in here, we'll just incentivize them to come in here. Didn't want to do that. First of all, we didn't want to incentivize, but second of all, they said, no, we don't want plants. Okay, that is a clear signal for vision that says, okay, we want office parks. The dilemma or the difficulty in being a leader is already people are having 3-day work weeks at home and 2 days at the office. They're already saying we can put cameras so we can communicate to you live from wherever you're working. We can know enough about what your white-collar job is so that we can communicate back and forth. So the question is, are we even going to need all these office buildings in 20 years? As our school system and our children work through the system, is the demographics of the community going to shift where we may already start to be seeing that, I don't know, where we need less new schools and more reconfiguring of the schools we have for the kind of student population we have. And it could be that the student population diminishes as the community ages. So we'll have those kind of things. So thinking long term, I think that is a key. But my idea of a vision isn't the tactical things of whether or not we're putting in a park because we think that's what people would like, or putting in a retail when we're congesting the road, and are we going to fix that? I think the long-term vision is going to be, what is it that Fishers, now that it's grown up, a little more mature, what is it that Fishers wants to be? Well, we're not going to be a seaside resort because we don't have a seaside. So we're not going to be able to say we want to attract people that like to go to a vacation place. We've got Indianapolis, which is what we are, a suburb are, and we always knew that we were a suburb of Indianapolis. So we want Indianapolis to be successful, and we don't want to compete with Indianapolis and Carmel because we're a community, we're a state where people like to drive their vehicles to different places. So if it's only 5 miles away to go, we wouldn't want to have an amphitheater that just, or a place like Carmel has their, I forget what they call it, but why would we do that? There's only one of the suburban areas probably needs to build that, and we also have a venue like that downtown. If they've got the sports teams downtown, we don't want to try to allure a sports team to come to Fishers when we've already got it downtown. Don't need 2 NFL teams in the same place. You get the idea of what I'm suggesting. So I think that's going to require a lot more dialogue and a lot more vetting where you make sure that all of the different people, if they don't come to the public meeting, then you figure out what we need to do so that we get that input, so we get the benefit of all that, so we don't have people after the fact saying, you mean you actually really are going to tear down our favorite train station because that gave us Signals Community Building, but we made it look like a train station, and you're going to cut down our big tree for private sector? Can't. It's almost, I wondered as I drove by the other day, I thought, well, I guess we shouldn't call it the municipal complex. We ought to find out it's a private entity now, I guess. We just happen to have some municipal aspects still sitting back there, but you can barely see them. That's not a vision. A vision is, what is it as a community we need to do? And I intend to bring the best resources to bear from the community. We've got incredible talent in this community, and I'm learning that every day when I walk through the neighborhoods. Even in my own neighborhood, I thought, really? This is what you do? You have this kind of expertise? Who knew? Well, it's because in Fishers, families tend to work and play with their next door neighbors and close friends, and so it's not the same kind of community that's like an urban setting in New York that maybe just everybody hits the street and tries to figure out, who do I know, who can I see, who can I tell them what I'm doing. It's a different community.
Right.
I don't know if I've said that well, but I hope you get the idea.
Right. Finally, why do you want to be mayor?
I think the time is now, and I have the most experience in qualifications. My children live here. My grandchildren live here. I've been blessed with good health. I know the history. I know what I started. I know what we put in place. I'm a financial, I guess I would say, I shouldn't say expert, no one should say that, but I'm certainly recognized for financial acumen in the public sector. I've helped so many communities in that regard. I've also made sure we had a financial structure and a budgetary process from years ago, fine-tuned by various people over the years. So I understand how all that works, and I have leadership experience where I've had people, I've grown a CPA firm, I've grown an office of a CPA firm, I grew Fishers, so I have demonstrated experience. So I just think this is what I'm going to do now. I'm not really ready to hang up the cleats.